Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's Dream Talk. My name is Daphne Lei. I'm the director of Illuminations, Chancellor's Arts and Culture Initiative. Uh, Today, I'm so happy and so honored to have our distinguished guest, Peter Sellars. Uh, I could easily say Peter needs no introduction, which is true. However, I want to be a dutiful host and and still do a very, very brief introduction because otherwise we could be here forever just to talk about what he has done. Peter Sellars is a renowned opera, theater, and festival director. He's also a MacArthur Fellow and as well as a member of American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has received multiple music awards such as Erasmus, Gish, and Polar Music Prizes. He's a distinguished professor at UCLA in World Arts and Culture / Dance. He's also the founding director of the Boethius Institute at UCLA. For Peter, the world is his stage. He creates his work by crossing all sorts of traditional boundaries, of different genres. So you might know him for his groundbreaking, transformative, and often provocative and controversial uh, interpretation of the classics. A lot of them are operas. Or you might know him for his advocacy for contemporary music, such as his work with John Williams and with Tan Dun, for instance, or for his many, many collaborations with different artists, such as with Toni Morrison and with Hua Wenyi in the 16th century Chinese opera project, which we are going to talk about today. So please allow me just for a little bit of time to explain the inspiration of today's event. I first met Peter during the planning stage of the Peony Pavilion project. I was a graduate student. I was translating for Madame Hua Wenyi, who will later start in this project 2 years later. And then the last time I saw Peter just recently, just a month ago, it was actually at the funeral of Madame Hua Wenyi. So when I saw him again and then we chatted, and I was just reminded of the passion he had when he was doing the project. He was very often tearing up when he talked about the young lovers' dreams. And so I chatted with him, and so I was thinking it would be so great for him to talk to our students today, the students who have gone through the devastating period of pandemic, and how do we keep dreaming. So that's why I wanted him today to talk about his dream and his dream for the students, his dream for the future, and also his artistic dreams. So the first part of today's event is I'm going to show a couple of very little clips of Peony Pavilion. The first one is the oldest I could find by Madame Hua Wenyi from 1985 or 86. And then the second one is Peter's production from 1998. So both videos, because they're old, and so the quality is not that great. But then I think it's a really important part of history. So please tolerate that. And then the second part will be about his most recent, I don't know if it's the most recent, very recent project called A Body is So Impermanent. And then that is a production that happened during COVID, the pandemic. Okay, so let me try to do this. So I forgot to tell you a little bit about Peony Pavilion. So sometimes people say it is a Chinese Romeo and Juliet, but it is more than Romeo and Juliet. Basically, it's a young woman who falls in love with her dream lover. In her dream, she meets a young, handsome young man. They fall in love. They make love. When she wakes up, she cannot find this young man. So she looks for him. She cannot find him, and then she withers away. But before she dies, she paints her portrait. And 3 years later, uh, the handsome young man finds this portrait and and falls in love with the portrait. And then now he has to go find her in the underworld. So he basically revived her. So and then happy ending. So this is beyond Romeo and Juliet. Juliet just doesn't just die. Juliet is revived. Okay, so that scene was like a love making scene, you know, flirting and a very erotic scene. So I'm going to see the second. The second one will be by Peter. So it's a pretty much the same scene, but you can just tell from his stage. Yeah, no, it would be
Gale of her desire while her soul trembles at the dewy brink of a sweet shaded veil. A mating of shadows, this consummation within the mind. No fruitful effect, and an apparition within the calm. Now my flower palace is sullied by.
Oh my gosh. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And thank Daphne for making this possible. This is incredible. Thank you. So, yes, you're seeing Madame Hua Wenyi, who I first met in 1989, thanks to Susan Pertel. Jane, sitting right there, Madame Hua Wenyi and her company, which represent the highest point of kunqu opera, which is the southern, more fragrant, poetic opera from Ming Dynasty, but literally Chiang Chang-su and Shakespeare died the same year, 1616. And this was, while Shakespeare existed in the West, this was the poetic, fragrant, richly imagined universe of lovers, but also very intense political material. Very intense political material. Madame Hua Wenyi apprenticed with, was the last student of Mei Lanfang, who, those of you who know your Brecht and your Meyerhold and contemporary modern 20th century theater, this is, Mei Lanfang was the Chinese actor who toured the West and was seen by Brecht, by Eisenstein, by Meyerhold, and Brecht, literally the week after he saw Chinese theater with Mei Lanfang, invented his alienation theory, which is you don't know what's going on and therefore you're interested. And that's because he had no idea what was going on. Eisenstein invented his theory of montage, which is two things that are contrasting, touching each other, and creating this frisson of meaning and feeling. And so literally, apart from other things, Mei Lanfang invented contemporary Western theater. And Hua Wenyi was his last student. So she was called Little Mei Lanfang. And so she is the carrier of that tradition. In the Cultural Revolution, she performed the famous Madame Mao revolutionary ballets, which she loved, holding a machine gun. She just thought that was great. She had a lot of fun. And she was at Mao's, crazy late night parties and all night parties and so on. She was a figure beloved and known all over China. And then in 1989, she and her company left during the Tiananmen massacre. They defected. They were living here in Los Angeles, working in dry cleaning stores and Chinese restaurants. And the greatest living Chinese monkey dancer just took away your broccoli plate. And so in the Los Angeles Festival in 1990, we invited Madame Hua Wenyi and her company to perform their first performances in their new country for their new audience. And for me, that's a really powerful thing because the largest cultural organization in the United States at this moment is the Metropolitan Opera, and that is entirely made of something that is not American. Or rather, it's the most American now, but of course, it's made by Russian, German, Italian immigrants in the 1850s. So for me, the presence of Chinese opera in California is very powerful. In California, Chinese opera was heard before Western opera. It's the foundational opera of the state of California is Chinese opera. And so to have these great performers in our midst was incredible. What I knew was, like Brecht, I didn't know what was going on. Well, that's not true. I went to China in 1980, when they were just opening up to individuals, and I saw Peony Pavilion in their version in Shanghai. I just walked into the theater. I didn't know what I was seeing, but you could tell it's an incredible art form. You should also tell that it's an art form that's been ridiculously censored. And so nothing is allowed to be said. And in that sense, of course, that's why Chinese poetry is the greatest poetry in the world, is because, millennia of censorship mean that you have to find how to say something very profound with the word cloud. So, for example, these erotic scenes are known as clouds and rain, which is the only way you can discuss what's happening. And so the way in which the poetry evolved, because you're not permitted to be direct, you actually have to invent a language that is profoundly suggestive and metaphoric and poetic. And that's very, very, very rich. But then that poetry, as we know in Western theater, over a period of time becomes a cliche. So how do you reactivate it so that the cliche is no longer an obstacle, but we can touch something real? We get the fragrance back. So we had a great 7 years where Hua Wenyi and I and Susan went to universities all across America and taught Chinese kunqu theater. That is to say, she did. I just watched. But then would contribute what I didn't understand, because for me, always, I grew up with John Cage, is, advances in art are a result of lack of skill and and beginner's mind. Is that beginner's mind actually is a very important place from which to enter a tradition. Because the tradition by itself just gets narrower and narrower. And at different points in traditions, there need to be a new energy that's brought from the demands of a new generation, the demands of a new time on earth, and also the demands of not repeating something endlessly. Because we actually don't want to get stuck in certain historical forms that are quite oppressive. And we need to break through. The other thing for me that's so powerful is that Chinese theater and Korean theater, Javanese theater, South Asian theater, but in fact theater all over the world, but in this particular corner of the world, theater, the origins of theater are ceremonies for the dead. You're actually performing not for the living, but you're trying to remind the dead that you're still thinking of them. And they left sensing injustice. They left sensing something was deeply wrong. They left in pain. And you need to make a ceremony for them that calls them back. Because if your ancestors are hurt and angry, you're not going to have a good life. And so you need to call them, share food, share songs, share dancing, and you need to say, we remember you. That's the origin of theater. And of course, in these years of COVID, when we've lost so many people, we don't even know how many. This act of remembrance is extremely important. And for me, the beauty of Chinese theater is that I'm always imagining the ancestors present. And with Shakespeare, you're in dialogue with your ancestor. And you open your mouth, and language from centuries ago is coming out of your mouth. The ancestors are speaking through us and to us. So this magic of Chinese theater, which is to create this world of smoke, of aroma, where every gesture touches something invisible. It's not the visible world. It's saying we are living with the invisible. The invisible, first of all, are our feelings, which, as you can see from that duet, most human beings' feelings are hidden most of the time. Most of us, I always remember working with the great American actress Colleen Dewhurst, who did, all those O'Neill plays. And the first day of rehearsal, she said to me, she was playing, the actress in Chekhov's Seagull. She said, "Okay, what's she hiding?" That's the only question. And that's the only question in life. We're all hiding so much. And theater is not about what you're showing, it's about what you're hiding. And the Chinese theater is so exquisite about letting us know we're not seeing everything, letting us know you can't judge by the surface, and constantly making a gesture that takes you to something you can't touch, you can't pronounce, you can't express. We're always on this edge of everything we dare not say or do, which makes this such a haunted and haunting art form, because again, it's also the voices of the dead. It's also the presence of what we're not proud of. It's the presence of what we can't acknowledge. And it's the presence of what we're living with and hoping for. And that presence of hope is very powerful in this play. And Daphne gave a beautiful introduction to the play. I want to just take two more steps, which is this young woman who's played by Hua Wenyi here. She's the daughter of one of the richest families in China. Her father is the future prime minister. She grows up in the Ming Dynasty. It's an era of materialism that does match the era we're in. At that point, things from all over the world came to China. People owned on a level of objects. The sheer material culture of the Ming Dynasty is beyond belief. And this young woman goes to the garden. And her parents say, no, you can't go to the garden. She goes to the garden alone, falls asleep, and has a dream. And she sees the man of her life in that dream. Now, of course, in China, it's very powerful what it means to go to a garden, what a garden is, what are imaginary gardens, all of our imaginary gardens. A garden is a dream space, as you know, in Chinese culture, in Japanese culture, what it means to cultivate a garden that gives you vistas. You know, the principles of garden organization I recommend to everyone. They are so spectacular. One of my favorite is just about views, that from where I am now, I have to be able to see to there, and to there, and a line is created that takes my gaze from where I'm standing through that tree, across this lake, to see that shrub that's in flower, and then beyond that, directly, Iran. That it's about near and far. And near is very far if your sister is not speaking to you. She's right here, and yet you're not communicating. Far is very real because, in fact, our underwear was made in Bangladesh or Honduras by kids working in sweatshops surrounded by guards with weapons. And that's why you can afford it, because it's very cheap. My Dickies pants are made in Honduras in a nightmare factory. So when I'm wearing these pants, I actually realize I'm in the middle of the crushed Honduran revolution that's going on right now. Near is far and far is near. And theater is about these distances not being real. In fact, the distance from your dream is right here. And it's also centuries away. And theater is about how you live inside your dreams, through your dreams. What it means when Martin Luther King says, I have a dream. What does it mean that your real life is in the dream? In the dream, you meet your future. And then you wake up and your future is gone. Her parents, of course, are very upset that she had a dream of some guy. And she said, no, we have already, we've chosen your husband. It's all done. And she starves herself to death. And that image for me is so American, is we have everything and we're starving to death. Because what we're hungry for is still not here. We have everything else, and we're starving. And that image of a woman surrounded by wealth, a young woman surrounded by everything her parents are giving her, and for her to say, you still can't give me everything I'm hungry for. That's what's playing out in the streets of Tehran tonight. A generation that's saying, this is not the country I want, and I'm leaving. And so we're living now with an epidemic of youth suicide. And it's very powerful that this man who has everything as the prime minister is horrified that his own daughter chooses to commit suicide by starving herself to death. There's mourning ceremonies. Meanwhile, as Daphne said, she paints her picture, and that's one of the most beautiful scenes in theater, is somebody talking to themselves by looking at their portrait and singing to their own portrait. And again, trying to imagine a future that you know you're not going to see. The guy finally finds her portrait, and he is a wandering scholar, and he's, as you know, the whole Chinese system is that there are these huge exams once a year for the imperial exam. So only people who take the imperial exam and pass can get into the higher echelon. And pretty much the group you saw on television a few weeks ago, same deal. Just to say that system is quite rigid, and you have to be one of the chosen. What's incredible is this young man decides to sit for the imperial exam, but he's wandering around China because he has no money. He's a student, so he's sleeping in these derelict temples, and he sleeps in the place where she's buried, and her ghost comes and visits him at night. The poetry is so wild. The erotic poetry of making out with a ghost is so cool. And Hua Wenyi and Susan and I were at Princeton with Toni Morrison, and we talked through the ghost scenes with Toni and her students, and that was really awesome African American scenes of the ghosts and the Chinese scenes of living with the ghosts and making out with the ghosts. And Toni said after she saw Hua Wenyi perform, when she dies, it's not wasting away. You would say, okay, she hasn't eaten for a long time, so she has no strength. It's the strongest, most terrifying performance in the world. It's an act of total defiance. And it's pure courage. It's not, excuse me while I die in the corner. It's the opposite. It's, I am insisting on seeing the world that I have dreamed of. And I will accept nothing less. The guy, starts making out with a ghost, and then he has to bring her back from the underworld, which is just so spectacular, because that doesn't just happen. And it's one of the all-time great theatrical scenes of her bringing her body back, and then they make out. And the erotic stuff, I'll read you a couple of lines because they're so cool. But just to say, then he says it's time to study for the imperial exams. He's studying for them, and he passes them. Meanwhile, they're living as poor kids. Oh my God, oh, this stuff is so incredible. Okay. So through caverns dug by spreading roots leads path to mortal world, and my cold flesh already you have caressed to warmth. Truly, one night of wedded union, 100 nights of bliss. But the tale we tell is of a love 3 incarnations long. My heart is one, whether mortal my being or no. Who is to tell illusion from reality? Though seemingly you must pluck flowers from the void, you're not called to retrieve the moon from the lake's surface. frozen, body and soul, in coldest chastity. Master Lu, you alone are the Lord of my rebirth. That's a lovemaking scene. Anyway, just to say, the stuff is spectacular. Meanwhile, her dad is made into the prime minister of China. And so her boyfriend, Lu Mengmei, decides he's going to go tell the new prime minister the happy news. I'm skipping 66 scenes because the play is 66 scenes long and took 6 days to perform. I'm taking you to the end, which has, as far as I can tell, never, ever, ever been performed in China. Ever. It was illegal when it was written, and it's illegal now. The student goes to the banquet where the prime minister is being elevated. And he bangs on the door and says, I have to speak to the prime minister. I have to speak to the prime minister. And the guards say, get out of here, kid. And he comes back and he's banging on the door. I'm going to shorten this a little bit, but just to say, finally, he's making a huge scene. So they finally bring him into the prime minister, the guards, and say, this kid is going crazy. And the prime minister looks at him and says, okay, what do you want? And the young man says to the prime minister, I want you to know your daughter is alive. The prime minister is horrified. At this, which should be the happiest day of his life, some horrible kid comes and puts right in his face the fact that his daughter committed suicide. The worst thing in his life. And he is so angry. He says, take this kid away right now. And the next scenes are of the prime minister personally taking charge of torturing this young man. And the young man says, no, you must understand your daughter is alive. And the prime minister says, continue torturing him till he stops saying that. They torture him. And the young man says, your daughter is alive. They torture him some more. Finally, the young woman comes into the torture chamber and confronts her father and says, Father, it's me. I'm alive. And he says to her, don't come near me. You are a ghost. And that is the world we're living in now, where a whole generation is trying to speak, is trying to tell us what is alive. And we can't face that. And we prefer the embrace of death and our own weird power, which is so unbelievably fragile and sad. This play is simply overwhelming. When we did it, we just did scenes from the first half, which was only 4 hours long. I haven't done the second half of the play, which is just astonishing. So I will, because the play is not going out of date. The play just with every day gets more and more important. And again, presenting truth in the only way you can see truth, which is in a dream. Because the world that surrounds us, we're not really looking at it. We can't. So it has to be presented as a dream. And of course, everybody knows Chuang-Tzu, the great philosopher, but this is the heart of this play, but it's also the heart of the beautiful performance style that you saw with Hua Wenyi. Where again, the way your arms are moving, the way you're singing, the way you're floating. This is Chuang-Tzu. You might dream you're drinking fine wine. Then the next morning, you're weeping and sobbing. You might dream that you're weeping and sobbing. Then the next morning, you're out on a rollicking hunt. In the midst of the dream, we can't know it's a dream. In the midst of a dream, we might even interpret the dream. After we're awake, we know it was a dream. But only after a great awakening can we understand that all of this, only after a great awakening can we understand that all of this is a great dream. Meanwhile, fools everywhere think that they're wide awake. They steal around us as if they understood things, calling this a king and that a cowherd. It's incredible. Confucius is a dream, and you are a dream. And when I say you're both dreams, I too am a dream. People might call such talk a sad and cryptic ruse, but 10,000 generations from now, we'll meet a great sage who understands these things. And when that happens, it will seem like tomorrow. Very, very beautiful, famous passage. Long ago, a certain Chuang-Tzu dreamt he was a butterfly fluttering here and there on a whim, happy, carefree, knowing nothing of Chuang-Tzu. Then all of a sudden he woke to find that he was, beyond all doubt, Chuang-Tzu. Who knows if it was Chuang-Tzu dreaming a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming Chuang-Tzu? Chuang-Tzu and butterfly. Clearly there's a difference. This is called the transformation of things. So in these times we're living in, we're trying to enact the transformation of things. We know that what we're in the middle of is not who we really are. We know we're capable of so much more. We know we're waiting for so much more. And we know we're dreaming of so much more. So theater was invented as this space where the dream could exist in 3 dimensions with real bodies in real space and real time. And Chinese theater developed with these gestures, this sense of air, this sense of dream, this sense of flotation, this sense of touch that is celestial. That touch is actually a spiritual quality. That the divine breath, everything is breathing, everything is moving in the breathing. And that what we're in the middle of is not a materialist society of objects, but is growth. Suffering, creating growth. The need for growth, the hunger for growth. So every gesture is the opening of a flower, is the opening of a blossom, is a sense that, yes, we're flowering. So the gesture is the seed, the bud opening, the flower, the fruit, and then planting the new seed. And you watch human beings as these plants that are capable of moving, walking, flowering, sustaining life, moving through life cycle after life cycle after life cycle. Every life cycle, you say, let's do this better this time. This play is so overwhelming because you see the whole Buddhist life cycle of a woman who dies unhappily and then comes back for her next life. And all of us are back again and again and again across millennia. We keep coming back here and we keep trying this time to do it better, which is what the Buddhists call the dedication to enlightenment. Every lifetime, we come back here to try and create some light in this place, some wisdom, some joy, some transformation. And theater is the place in which we can enact all those dreams, not just imagine them, but put ourselves, body and soul, into them and test out everything we're dreaming of. So that's the first part. and and now we have Daphne has organized a small coda, which is coming from this work to something that I've been working on this last 2 years. And maybe should I say a word about how it was made, or will you say that? Maybe I'll say a word. One of the things that I've been working on is not making theater to make shows. Because for me, what we're living with, nobody needs more shows. We actually need something that is a ritual, a ceremony that brings us together after we've all been so apart, after we've all been in isolation, after we've all been frightened of every living human being, and after we've been fed a nonstop diet by the media all these years of fear, 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 all the fear you can eat, and even more fear than you can eat. And everything is fear, and all you're eating is fear. All day long, you are eating more fear and more fear and more fear. What do you think that does to the social fabric? What do you think that does to a human being? It's just only existing by eating fear every day. So for me, this ceremony of how do we come together again? How do we find the space to be together? And also, how do we find the space to say goodbye? Because how many million people have left in these last 2 years, and they couldn't say goodbye, and we couldn't say goodbye to them. And people left wrapped in plastic in isolation rooms. Sometimes you could look at them through glass or through FaceTime, but we didn't say goodbye. What does it mean to not say goodbye to 7 or 8 million people in these last 2 years of our life? I'm quite obsessed with a Buddhist text from the 1st century called the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is powerful because the main character is not Buddha. Usually in a Buddhist sutra, Buddha gives a discourse. In this case, it's this guy named Vimalakirti, who's a crazy businessman. And his main quality when you meet him is he's ill. And Buddha says to his disciples, okay, this guy is really sick, you have to go visit him. And the disciples come up, there's an entire chapter of excuses of the disciples' excuses why they're not going to go visit this guy. Finally, Buddha says, shut up and go. So really, really, really resenting this, the Buddhist disciples all show up at this guy's living room. This guy, meanwhile, has emptied his house of everything. So there's nothing and there's no place to sit down. And the disciples are freaked out when they walked in. And it's awkward. There's a big awkward silence. And then finally, Shariputra, the main disciple, says to this guy, okay, if you're so holy, how come you're sick all the time? And then this man answers, because sickness is my Buddhist practice. He says, most people are suffering so deeply and unable to admit it, unable to talk about it, unable to deal with it, that the only way I can hear what somebody's trying to say is to be in more pain than they are in, and listen through the pain. shuts the disciples up for a moment. And Buddha's idea that sickness is not just here as an affliction, but is also a teaching, is also a step on a spiritual path, is also, well, I always think of the beautiful sentence by the Muslim philosopher of the 11th century, Al-Ghazali, who says, sickness is a cord of love by which God draws those closer to him he wishes to speak to. That is to say, we're all so busy with our lives, and then you're sick, and you have to stop all that. You have to get quiet. You have to get still. You have to leave everything you think you're doing that keeps you too busy to notice anything. And you have to come to a very quiet place. And there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to run. You have to start facing some things. So in the first year of the pandemic, I wanted to take the first words that Vimalakirti speaks to Buddha's disciples, and I wanted to make a version of them with the great Chinese calligrapher Wang Dongling, who calligraphy, as some of you probably know, in traditional East Asia, is a healing practice. That is to say, when you're ill, when you have a sickness, you start writing out sacred texts, and you get your ink and your paper and you start writing. And it's a way the sacred text enters your body, because you're not reading it, you're putting it into your body. Calligraphy itself is a dance. It's a trace of a dance. What you see on the paper is the graph of the dance. You can see where somebody's breathing. You can see where the move goes quicker or slower. It's a record of a human being being alive from this point to this point. So when you're writing out a sutra, you're letting the meaning enter your body. The same dancer who you saw with Hua Wenyi, Michael Schumacher. Michael was a star of the Frankfurt Ballet, an avant-garde dancer, and she's the person Hua Wenyi picked as her lover in yellow. And we auditioned lots of people because I really I can't stand the choreography for the guy in the traditional version. He's standing around with this like flower sleeves and I hate that stuff. So I said to Wamini, that has to go. I can't see a male person behave this way. This is appalling. And so we started auditioning people, including lots of modern dancers. One person who I'm not going to name to you, but who immediately got on the floor and started doing all this stuff around her legs. And she said, "Get up, you're not a dog." Anyway, she decided to pick Michael, who again is an avant-garde dancer. And you'll see now Michael here, last year, a little older. And so we try and put this sutra into his body. And the text is chanted because all sacred texts, long before they were written down, were sung. And so what is it to, again, bring the text into the body and have the text come from inside out? Meanwhile, put the text in the body with dance, and meanwhile, put the text in the body with calligraphy. So we were going to tour museums with these three artists from three different cultures. Michael, of course, being American and European, and Ganavia, the singer who you will hear from a sacred singing tradition of the temples of South India. She is learned her as a child. She was in a group going from village to village, chanting every step along the way, and then singing to the goddesses in each temple. So then, as COVID got underway, we realized we were never going to do this project live. And so we set up Zoom. And so what you're going to see is Wang Dongling at 3 in the afternoon in his studio in Hangzhou, Ganavia at midnight in the Tai Valley outside of Portland, and Michael at 9 in the morning in Amsterdam. And so the three performers are on different continents with thousands of miles between them in totally different times of day, simultaneously collaborating with each other on Zoom live and listening and trying to respond. And for me, the power of this is also that, of course, the person who you're thinking of, you can't go near them. So for me, one of the most important things is the internet before the internet, which is you're feeling very joyous at a certain moment in your life, or you're feeling completely in despair because somebody is thinking of you. That is the internet before the internet. Is your thoughts actually can be felt by somebody on the other side of the world. So you'll see Ganavia is trying to comfort Michael, but of course is not in the same room. Michael is thinking of Ganavia as he's suffering in bed. And across their bodies, a future is being written.
Oh, my friends. My friends. Oh, my friends. Oh, my friends. My friends. This body is so impermanent. insubstantial, perishable, short-lived, painful, painful, filled with diseases, subject to change, subject to change.
Yes, 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 yes. So you got the idea. That goes on for another 70 minutes of really going all the way through the path and really coming out the other side. It's 4 paragraphs from the sacred text from the first century. And the 2 halves of the text, the first half you're seeing, which just keeps getting more and more intense, more and more intense. So overwhelming. And takes you really to the place of the death moment. And then the text changes in this incredible way and says, oh, by the way, stop suffering in this body because you have another body. And that is the body that lives forever. And that is the body of your actions. It's the body of everything you do, everything you've given, everything you've made, everything you created and brought into the world remains. And that's the body of your actions. And that body is a body of joy, a body of giving, a body of celebration, a body of wisdom, a body of truth, a body of kindness, a body of generosity, a body of beauty, a body of life itself. So the second half just goes into this joyous space where all the worlds come together. And you realize we're all here to offer everything to each other. And that outlives us. And we'll be back for the next round. But it's all in 4 paragraphs, like short paragraphs. But Ganavia sings them as you can hear. And as you get in the poetry that we're all discussing, you have to sing it over and over again until you really understand. You are the butterfly. Yes. Questions, comments?
I think we're all under this spell, right? The beauty, the compassion, and the truth, and everything. And yeah, this is the internet connecting us, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. K2, yeah.
Yes. Hello.
Hello. Oh, thank you so much for an amazing talk, very thoughtful, provocative, ingenious. I'm just awed to listen to you. I wanted, I mean, since you can ponder on any subject, really, I just wanted to kind of ask if you would talk about the connection to the sacred, which clearly you show, you know, whether it's the Chinese or whether it's the Indian or whatever, and kind of evoking sacred texts. And then also kind of your attachment to the political and the world that we live in. So I wonder if you could talk a little more about that. It's kind of a huge topic, but
Well,
if you
actually,
could, yeah.
thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Um, for me, those are just the job description. you know, and it's also very basic. I came to California to work on the Los Angeles Festival, which was the continuation of the Olympic Arts Festival. And what we did is we shaped that festival by convening 350 people across 3 years to curate this festival. And we brought artists together from many disciplines, many worlds. And we had a steering committee of 25 artists who were, all lived in Los Angeles, but all were coming from completely different worlds. And so there was a Lebanese oud player and a African American video, hip hop video maker, and a poet, lots of people. One of the most moving people in that room was a Native American activist, Paul Apodaca, a Navajo, who spent most of his life, he taught at Chapman for many years. He spent most of his life getting the bones of his people out of metal drawers in museums in the basement and giving them a proper burial and say, excuse me, where is the primitive culture if you're keeping people's bones in a drawer? This should be done correctly. So one of the things we did in the festival was we decided to have a series in Los Angeles of, we called them sacred sites. And we had concerts in the Armenian Orthodox Church, which you drive past, but you never go in, or the Thai Temple in North Hollywood, or all of these amazing places you see, but you've never been inside. And so we said, let's make concerts in all these places. And then we made concerts in the incorrect place. So the flamenco night was in Second Baptist Church where Martin Luther King used to, and the Palestinian Dance Company was in Wilshire Boulevard Temple, and there was, crazy punk Chicano performers in the Armenian Orthodox Church. So it was also what you would not normally see and what the congregations would not normally see in those places, because we didn't want to, for the people who lived there, to show them what they already see every day. Anyway, so we were calling this sacred sites. And Paul, the Navajo activist, objected to this. He said, why do you want to have that title? I said, well, these things are sacred. And Paul leaned across the table and said, can you tell me anything that is not sacred? So that day stays with me. And you realize, of course, everything is sacred. And we have to treat it that way. And this question of transformation, as we move towards or away from the butterfly in our lives, is political. Because the will to enlightenment is we have to make a difference every lifetime here. We have to try and move this forward. And so, of course, that's political, because we have to help make change. This transformation is not just abstract, it's very real. It's, why are people starving? And what is the food? And how do you feed them? And how do you nourish yourself? So that's for me the assignment. And again, we are given the most amazing conditions to work in, which are conditions of extreme injustice, which does create, a lot of suffering and also the best art, right? I mean, in the martial law period in Czechoslovakia, the greatest novelists wrote these incredible novels that were circulated in typed manuscripts when it was illegal to publish them. And those typed manuscripts made their way all around the country. And you had a generation of great writers. Now, in freedom, Prague is the world capital of creation of pornography. So you have to recognize that human beings don't get moving until things get bad. I don't have a drinking problem. No, I don't have a drinking problem. No, I don't have a drinking problem. No, I do not have a drinking problem. And you hit the wall and you have a drinking problem. But it's not till you hit the wall that you finally acknowledge what's going on. Otherwise, we're busy pushing everything away, pushing everything away. So the times we're living in right this minute are really important times to make work and to make an alternative to so many of the things that surround us. And so that's when artists are actually in their element.
We're over time a lot, but if we maybe take one more question, you, yeah, please. Yeah.
Oh my God! Hello.
Opera earlier, and I was thinking of things like Satyagraha and Akhenaten and those kinds of things. I wonder if you might just comment on that kind of opera, which I love.
Yes, I think opera is, again, for me, does go back to this sharing supper with the dead and this beautiful shared space that moves across time, moves across generations, moves across um, psychic states. So I love opera because, of course, it's giving you the inner life of everyone and everything. And somebody's thinking something and they're saying one word, and then the orchestra, right? There are 110 people saying, inside that word is all this. And I love that. I love the richness of, just like when you're walking down the street, you see a few things, but you have no idea everything that's going on because life is so complex. There's so many layers to everything. You're noticing one or two layers. What I love about opera is suddenly all the layers are up there and they're all coming at you simultaneously. And whatever you can take in, it has the richness and multi-leveled thing of, what Aristotle said is, it's showing you totality. This idea that we're in this way bigger picture. So for me, I'm completely devoted to opera in that sense, and not so much opera that are basically focused on an obvious type of storytelling, but as you said, like Satyagraha, these operas that exist in transcendent time and space and are constantly having a simultaneity of lifetimes, feelings, memories, and dreaming forward and calling the future into being, which is just so inspiring. And opera also has the collective juice. And for me, that's the other thing right now that's so important is we work together. Everything we have to do now, we have to do together. We have to learn how to work together again. We have to learn that we're not alone. We never will be alone. Everything you choose to do every day is affecting people all over the world. Nothing we do is alone. We're not separate, we're connected. And as Bob Thurman likes to say, the reason you're so exhausted every day after 16 hours is you've been trying to be separate from everything. And it's very exhausting. And Bob said, well, then you go to sleep because you're so tired and you wake up refreshed. And he said, what happens while you're asleep that is refreshing? What happens is the positive energy of the universe reweaving everything into a completely interconnected reality gives you back who you are, which is not separate. And then you wake up the next day and try and control everything and try to be separate from everything all over again and be exhausted. But in fact, opera takes you to this place where everything is connected, everything is interpenetrating, everything is part of a giant fabric. And that is the truth. And it's exhilarating.
Thank you, thank you.
Can we do one more?
Okay, one more question. And of course, Tristan and Isolde is happening in December with the Berliner Philharmonic. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your amazing talk. You have told many stories about China and about Meilan Fang. My question is, how does Meilan Fang influence you? And what do you think of Meilan Fang's performance art? Thank you.
Well, of course, I only know Meilan Fang on old film. But for me, again, what does live is not so much even seeing the film, but let's put it this way. When I'm making a production, I don't really care what the audience thinks that night. They like it or they don't, or they get it or they don't, or who knows what. Because for me, most of us don't understand what we're experiencing while we experience it. It's only later you look back and you say, oh, this was a terrible time for my family. Living through this was terrible. But when you look back, you realize we had to go through that. And in fact, that's the first time your uncle stopped lying. In fact, and you look back and you realize all these things were happening that were ultimately positive. But at the time, it was very unpleasant. And so for me, theater is the same way. When you're living it, you're there, you don't really know what it is. And so what interests me is what people feel 2 weeks later. That's why in a performance, I never tell anybody next to me what I'm thinking of the show, because that's all you remember the next day, is what you said instead of what you saw. So for me, I try to not talk about it for a while and let it live inside me. And so for me, every performance is planting seeds. And then 25 years later, there's a tree there. But the tree isn't there that night. The tree is there later. And it's when a seed went into somebody's heart that was watered and got sunlight. And that's all we're doing in a performance, is planting a seed, which grows a generation later and is remembered a certain way. So my favorite thing is somebody who sees one of my shows and says, the next day calls their close friend and says, I saw the worst thing in the world last night. It goes on for a half hour. Or says, I saw the best thing in the world last night. It goes on for the half hour. For me, it's the same half hour. Because whether they liked it or didn't like it, they're pouring it out to somebody. And they're becoming themselves a creative artist. Then that person hears and goes and tells one of their friends about something they never saw. That is the beauty of performance for me, is that most of the people who are talking about it never saw it, but it lives in your imagination in some beautiful way. And that's how I feel about Meilan Fang.
Thank you so much today. Yeah. Thank you.